Not long after the election, still a little battered and bruised, a few of us in Barnet met for a curry and a chat about how we might regroup.
We all agree the election result and the politically turbulent few years had meant there was a greater need for more political education to empower communities to recognise issues that impact their lives and equipped us with skills to fight back.
And that night, Barnet Transformed was born. Inspired by the World Transformed and other local offshoots, we envisioned Barnet Transformed to be a space to foster political education and participation through arts, discussion and collective joy.
The pandemic set us back, but after seeing how it further exacerbated existing inequalities, we soon regrouped to see how we could be a part of the movement to build back in Barnet and beyond.
As Socialists, we're committed to doing this work collectively with 5 key principles guiding us as we move forward. First is a radical vision where we imagine a world rooted in joy and justice, where power is shifted to the working class.
A world without borders, where we draw connections between our struggles in Barnet and those facing the worst effects of capitalism around the world.
A space for everybody, where everyone is able to express themselves freely and authentically. We will loudly stand in solidarity with all oppressed people, whether they be people of colour, disabled people, or those from the LGBTQ+ community. Black lives matter. Trans women are women. Trans men are men. Non-binary people are valid.
People power. Power isn't gifted from above, and our activities will reflect this, regardless of whether we have socialists in positions of power or not. Where useful, we will engage with electoral politics, but our struggle is not limited to this.
We will facilitate knowledge sharing, recognising that whilst expertise is valuable, the lived experience which exists in our communities is vital to deliver effective political education.
Lastly, we can only do this together, and your involvement is vital. We will be sharing ways in which we can expand this initiative in due course. Sorterbiography.
Hi everybody, I'm Josie.
And I'm Tom, and we're editors at New Socialist, and maybe we'll talk about that later if there's time. But for now, we're very happy to introduce Esther Leslie, the first speaker. I was going to say Esther Leslie is the only British person who should be allowed to write about Walter Benjamin, but that's unfair. Not on other British Benjaminians, but on Esther Leslie herself, whose work certainly encompasses engaging with Walter Benjamin, but also kind of cultural history and studies. She's written an incredible book on LCDs, another incredible book on Hollywood animation, and she's going to be speaking now, reading from Yealm, a Sorterbiography by her mother, Sheila Lahr. Thanks.
Hi everyone, hope you can hear me. I'm going to just preface this with some words. So I'm so happy to be part of this initiative which galvanises us to cast an eye towards better futures and understands that if we can reclaim and celebrate our past, we might know better what the possibilities of our future are. When I grew up in Barnet, Margaret Thatcher was the MP and a cabinet member and finally Prime Minister. Her prominent presence made it seem as if the place was suffused with blue reaction. But it was not and never has been, and that's why counter-history can cast a kind of magic, not to undo the past, but at least aerate it with a hope yet to be fulfilled. What I hope to bring to this project is some glimpse into longer histories, but also my own local one, the one, for example, of being an anti-Nazi punk in Barnet, one of many, of being in bands and writing poems, because here in the suburbs there germinated, back then at least, a specific type of boredom that shaped what kind of lives we didn't want to live and fueled our criticisms and made us realise if we wanted more, we had to, in some way, do it ourselves, but together. We did not come to that conclusion alone, and one thing I hope to communicate in any further exploration of radical Barnet is how many others had come to this place in order to occupy a borderland between city and country, a place which faces both ways and so sees and maybe learns more. I'm talking here of how inspired we were by the numerous musicians and artists who clustered here, avant-gardists, some of them, pub rockers, others, improvisers, new wavers, all sorts. They encouraged us, my school friends, but others too, to set up bands, fanzines, gigs, to write, to paint, to build ridiculous sculptures and deposit them on unwitting streets. We heard tell of the artists and creators who'd come here too, marginal ones, such as a friend's father, a potter who created happenings with a collective called The People Show, and whose son you may know nowadays as the chewing gum artist, Ben Wilson. We found out about older histories too of the artist colony at the Abbey on Park Road, where Lottie Reininger, the shadow animator, lived, in flight from the Nazis, and where she hosted John Hartfield, the anti-fascist montagist. These were people who made a new and extraordinary culture that was anti-fascist in all its parts, and we tried to develop our own versions in the grip of Thatcherism and its Falklands hysteria, rehearsing like all the other bands at the Broughton's We Mean It studios near the Old Bull. This is all collective history, but I had my personal route through it. I came from a political family. My grandfather, Sheila Lahr, was a German anarchist who fled the tyrannous regime of Wilhelmine Germany in 1905 and met a Polish descent Jew, also an anarchist, called Esther Leslie. They settled in Friern Barnet, right at the edge of Barnet, in Wilton Road, not far from Alexandra Palace, where my grandfather had been interned in the First World War and where he met the anarchist theorist Rudolf Rocker. From here, Charlie and Esther organised a progressive bookshop, published political and poetical tracts, and smuggled D.H. Lawrence's band, Lady Chatterley's Lover, into England. And they hosted Sunday lunches for radicals and revolutionaries such as George Padmore and C.L.R. James. These anarchist immigrants, freethinkers, were legendary to me, and though my circle in Barnet followed that tradition, being mostly anarcho-punks and left communists, I followed more, in the political sense, in the footsteps of their daughter, my mother Sheila, who, like my father, was a Trotskyist. I will finish with a few words of what she calls her Sorterbiography, Yealm, which is this book with its plethora of details about radical strands in and around her childhood home in Friern Barnet. This very short passage comes from the point in the book when she is 12 and her father has been interned for a second time on the Isle of Man in World War II, and her mother is about to be sent there too. While my mother is so occupied, I scribble a note to Colleen to say, my mother's being interned and I and Una are going to stay with people in Gloucestershire. I'll write you. Then, murmuring to the detectives that I'm going to the outside lavatory, I duck down past the kitchen window and run out of the side door and into the street, up to Coneyhatch Lane, along to Greenham Road, up to the top and push the note through the letterbox of number 91 and dash home again. One of the detectives and my mother are out in Wilton Road searching for me. Where have you been? My mother cries as I come into view, and I mumble that I went to put a note through Colleen's door. The detective says nothing, but it must have been this fear that given a chance, I and perhaps Una and my mother will abscond, and that results in a detective shadowing all three of us at the police station whenever the cell door opens in answer to our ring and we make our ways to the WC. However, at last we're ready to leave the house, and it's only when we're in the police car and halfway up the road that my mother remembers that she's left her handbag on the kitchen table, a bag holding money and keys to the house. But the detectives refuse to return. Neither gas nor electricity have been disconnected, and the flat is wide open. So, thank you. I wish you all the best with this fabulous project.
That was incredible. That was so cool. Like, I'm a newcomer to Barnet, and I live in Friern Barnet as well. Or we live in Friern Barnet, and I had no idea it was so cool. We should make it this cool again, 100%. Our next speaker is Maryam Asaria. She's a local trade unionist and campaigner, and also a teacher, which probably is the most radical position to hold in society at the moment, given the amount of discourse around teachers. Yeah, it's ridiculous, like teachers' unions and, you know, the kind of COVID thing, closing schools. It's been quite bad. She's going to be talking about why Barnet needs to be transformed. So I'll hand over to Maryam now.
Yeah, so I'm going to speak a bit about Barnet Council and its relationship with Capita and why Barnet needs to be transformed. I'm really excited by Barnet Transformed and the thought of people coming together to envisage a transformed future. I'm really excited to be here, so thanks. The role of Barnet Council should be to support us as residents and provide key public services. But in Barnet, because we outsource almost everything, this isn't happening. The relationship between Barnet Council and Capita doesn't work in our interest as residents. In particular, this relationship doesn't work in the interest of those who rely on support the most. So Barnet Council has outsourced to Capita roads, parking, finance, planning, human resources, libraries and all public buildings, customer services, almost everything on a 10-year contract. So I want to focus on 3 important aspects that should be present in any local council, and in our case, since Capita, they're just not. I want to use these aspects to highlight how outsourcing is not working in our favour. So number 1 is accountability and finances. Because Capita are able to use the commercial confidentiality clause, even through freedom of information requests, crucial questions go unanswered. So council papers, which are public information, have increasingly become confidential to the public. On top of this, there was a £2 million fraud quite recently by a Barnet Council employee on a contract with Capita, revealing weak financial safety nets in the structures. Number 2 is cuts to public services. So Barnet is contracted every year to pass a huge fixed amount to Capita. This cannot be changed and is non-negotiable. So when the council chooses to make further cuts, what gets cut are the few services that haven't been outsourced. For example, children's services. These services used to be rated outstanding in Barnet, but are now inadequate according to Ofsted. And number 3, reduction in quality of services. The council always had a responsibility for upkeep of the area. Now our borough is no longer overseen by the council. Rather, if something goes wrong, people have to report it themselves for anything to possibly have a chance of being done about it. The purpose of outsourcing to Capita was supposed to be to make savings. This, however, hasn't transpired. We were told that the quality of services wouldn't suffer, but residents across Barnet can vouch for the fact that they have. The quality of our planning service needs a transformation, as was revealed in a recent Guardian article by Robert Booth. In Barnet, residents are no longer at the centre of planning committees and planning permission, but the developers are. He explained that developers pay regional enterprise who have a joint venture with Capita and specialise in planning applications to draft planning documents for the developer to serve their interests. Public interest is marginalised. This has resulted in large numbers of flats being built, yet a massive shortage of council homes and social housing within the plans, even though this is a massive issue in Barnet. The joint partnership between Capita and regional enterprise has enabled redevelopment projects across Barnet, from Stone Grove to Sweets Way, to West Hendon to Dulles Valley, where most residents who have lived and are rooted in Barnet have been forced out of their homes and even out of their area. So just to end, we need a transformation of Barnet that puts residents before corporate desire and profit.
Cool. So that was really good, and I think like these kind of questions here about like what's the relation between capital and often a corrupt capital and like democratic possibilities locally are like really important to raise. Moving on, we're going to have Syed Ahmed talking now. Syed has nearly 20 years experience working in sustainable energy in a wide range of roles. And he's going to be talking about a new and really crucial initiative, Barnet Climate Action Group. Thanks.
Good evening all. First of all, thank you very much to Barnet Transformed for inviting me along this evening to talk about what I feel is still an important issue, even though I think some of the areas obviously have been eclipsed by other more pressing matters that we've seen over this year. So just to take you back a year or so ago, we saw huge amounts of activity on the climate and emergency front. We saw huge amounts of protests going across the world. And we saw a welcome number of local authorities across the country respond by actually saying that their residents, their businesses are pressing them to do more on tackling climate change. And so those boroughs would then look to declare a climate emergency and importantly set out a plan, a strategy for how they would decarbonise their services and how they would bring through a whole suite of different actions which would help communities and individuals come forward with opportunities for them to help decarbonise their lifestyles and provide services that will allow them to access less fossil intensive routes for living their lives. And that's been incredible because we've seen vast amounts of action going on by these councils across the country, over 250 in total, setting out strategies for how they look to increase greener spaces in their neighbourhoods, enhance activities like walking and cycling, bring on greater amounts of public transport, retrofit homes, bring more energy generation into their areas and allow communities to actually shape their neighbourhoods and the way in which they can actually invest in new assets to generate cleaner energy. This has all been really inspiring, and I've been lucky enough to be working with a number of local authorities, and of the 250 odd local authorities around the country, 29 of London's 33 boroughs have signed a climate emergency declaration, and they may have been delayed over the summer, what with officers being redeployed or more frontline services related to addressing COVID, but at the same time, they're edging forward on their climate emergency strategies. And we're seeing some really innovative ways in which boroughs are bringing residents together to actually shape the way in which they see the environment in their neighbourhoods being harmed. And the one thing about COVID is, in terms of climate emergency, it's, as a previous speaker said, it's increased, it's amplified the level of action we need to take on a key host of issues which also reflect climate emergency. Things like green spaces, things like our homes. You know, if people do suffer from COVID and have to go back to cold homes, homes that are really poorly treated, they themselves will just end up going back into hospitals again. How can we actually use our transport systems in a safer way? How can we get fitter by getting away from our cars and using bicycles and walking more? And so we envisage a significant change in the way we use energy and create energy. And the crucible of where we'll see these changes is actually in cities. And all these changes must be done in a really equitable way. We've got to remember that a number of households have to pay an awful lot more for their energy, and we're seeing parts of North Cricklewood and Colindale having 5 times the amount of fuel poverty in their areas than more richer parts of the boroughs. I've only got a few seconds left, I can see, but just to say, of the 29 boroughs working in London, Barnet is not one of them. And so we need to make sure that Barnet really kind of addresses this issue, sets out a climate strategy. And that's why Barnet Climate Action Group has come together. They're concerned residents representing a number of different groups. We've been meeting ad hoc really since around about July 2019, less so over the last 4 or 5 months, but we will be holding a meeting in September. More information can be found on barnetclimate.org.uk. Please do come along to our meetings. We'll be setting out an agenda for the September meeting very shortly. I've only got to say that there are huge opportunities in Barnet to really kind of respond to citizens' needs, residents' needs about what they can do in their neighbours and communities. It's very far away from happening at the moment, but I'm optimistic we can change that. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much for that, Syed. It's going to be one of the crucial battles, I think, ecological stuff in the coming years. Not just because we lost the election, but because now the current leadership of the Labour Party is basically not bothered, it would seem. So yeah, whatever we can do ourselves is going to be so crucial, I think, in the coming years. I'm really excited to introduce the next speaker. It's Amy Hayes. who is a Barnet Socialist activist, a campaigner, a mother, and one of my co-organisers for the Barnet Mutual Aid Group. She was just absolutely indispensable and a brilliant comrade, so I'm really, really excited to hear her speak tonight. Amy's going to be talking about underfunding in schools and the discrimination faced by renters. So take it away, Amy.
Hi, my name's Amy Hayes. I'm a local Barnet activist and campaigner. I've been living in Barnet since 2016, which is the same time that I became politically active. I am a proud working class woman who grew up in a council estate in Camden, and growing up, my vision of politics was always white, middle class men in suits who always spoke well and said the right things. To me, I didn't see people who represented me and my community. This ideology underpins all of my politics. I feel that the most authentic voices, the voices in our communities, are the ones that are underrepresented and massively missing in Parliament. And those authentic voices and experiences are the ones that are vital in influencing our policy. My campaign and campaign involvement is always in things that I have personal experience of, things that directly affect my life. This type of campaigning is really important to me. I really believe in that collective voice and that power that comes from the community coming together. That collective is far more powerful than the top-down campaigning. Stop School Cuts Barnet is a clear example of this. Parents, teachers and other key voices in education coming together to create actions from a meeting in which we all identified concerns, and from this chose the direction of our campaign.
You're handing in a petition? Should we go give the petition? Yeah. You ever go in the store?
Okay. What's that picture of, Caleb?
Me and you.
Yeah, and what were you doing, Caleb?
I was ringing number 10 door and someone comes. And who is it?
That's the security guard.
Yeah, and I given a wet bag.
What was inside the bag? Do you remember?
Yeah.
Was there lots of papers inside the bag?
Yeah, to do in this house.
Yeah, and who was we going to give those papers to?
That guy.
Yeah, and he's going to give them to the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And what was you trying to tell the Prime Minister? To save your
nursery.
Save your nursery school.
Save our school! Save our school! Save our school!
Highlights so far have been lobbying RMP with over 60 parents, hand delivering our asks via a local petition which got thousands of signatures, and later on supporting the NEU campaign for maintain nursery school funding by going to Downing Street with my 3-year-old and handing in a national petition. The future of the campaign will focus on the effects of COVID on school funding and making sure the teachers yet again do not have to pay for the government's lack of funding. Another area I feel particularly passionate about is housing. I've been a private renter for over 10 years, and anybody who's rented will have at least one horror story. I feel personally the lack of security really stressful, and also the barriers to rent. In Barnet, I had called probably every single letting agency to view properties, and I was told by every single one that they wouldn't even show me a property because apparently we don't earn enough. We are a working household who earn a decent amount of money, but we kept being told at every step that wasn't enough. We would need a guarantor of over 55,000. Some properties even told me that I had basically too many children and they could not rent that property to me. Most of them, actually all of them, wouldn't even show me the property. The problem with this is that how are people supposed to live? The barriers to rent, the discrimination, despite changes of law, despite changes of legislation. Yes, a estate agent cannot put strictly in their advert no DSS, which is the old term that people still use without even understanding welfare benefits or how top-up benefits work or anything, but if you call up and you don't earn enough, they just won't show you the property. There's so much more that needs to be done with housing policy. We need to make sure that we create a better society for housing and for renters. We need to create more opportunities, I guess, by giving people more choice. We give people more choice by creating more council housing, not affordable housing, council housing, because what is affordable to people creating affordable housing is not affordable for most people. We need to create council housing. We need to give people more choice. If we are able to do that, it will in turn stamp out rogue landlords, properties that are not fit for habitation, discrimination, and people not having just to take properties because they feel grateful. We need to do more. We need to protect tenants. Yes, temporarily, there is an eviction ban. This has been extended by 4 weeks. What will happen to people after that? Yes, the courts may be backlogged for people being served a Section 21. What happens after that? Where are these people going to go? There is not enough council accommodation housing for people to go to. Letting agencies are repeatedly discriminating against low-income families, people on universal credit, people who are disabled, all different types of families. Where are these people supposed to live? We want to create a community in Barnet. We can't do that if people are constantly having to move. For me, having children in school, living with this worry is one of the hardest things, not knowing if your children will, you'll have to move your children's schools, they'll have to leave their friends behind, their family. You create friends here, a proper community, and when times are hard, these are the people you fall back on. If we don't have those communities, what happens to us as people? What happens to our mental health? We need these people, we need these communities. It's vital for all of us. This is what has motivated me to want to work under the guidance of the London Renters Union to create branches, or a branch in Barnet, to try and create that community of renters with people who understand, people who can come together and support each other, and hopefully make a really positive change in Barnet.
Wow, that was really, really good. I'm really, yeah, we've been thinking so much recently just about sort of, yeah, the intersections of things like schools and homes around the COVID crisis, and sort of the ways in which like the home and the school have been sort of used as a sort of like potential safe place where you can kind of offload people, so they're not, you know, running around outside spreading things. But actually what happens, you know, to what extent are schools actually prepared to deal with this kind of, you know, incredibly bizarre situation, and to what extent are homes actually safe? To what extent are they, you know, and to what extent, you know, are people able to kind of remain in their homes too? So yeah, it's just so crucial. It's so crucial to talk about these things. I think we've got a bit of space now where we can chat about some new socialist stuff for a short while, maybe just a minute. Do you want to say some words, Tam?
So we're both editors of New Socialist as well as Barnet residents, and yesterday we published finally, and very belatedly actually, the first kind of proper edition we're doing, which was called Bad New Times. And like, obviously, like, this is kind of something constituted by, you know, I think actually like a lot of the same experiences animating Barnet Transformed. Like we lost the election. There was a possible future there, a possible future of, you know, at the very least, you know, amelioration of like the humanitarian crisis of austerity, you know, anti-war positions, some effort towards addressing the climate crisis, that, you know, in the words, and I think we want to insist on this actually, in the words of Raymond Williams, although there's a kind of trajectory of this through Mark Fisher as well, but in the words of Raymond Williams, there was Williams says shocking and slow cancellation of the future. I know, like, coming back from canvassing in Barnet and then the exit poll, like a very much there, a shocking cancellation of a future that could have happened. But obviously then, that future's gone, and the question is, how we deal with that, and how we kind of create something out of almost like the fragments of things and the aspects of Corbynism that still do matter, the kind of possibilities of solidarity, the possibilities of solidarity linked to ideas around political education and popular capacities to think and create as well. And I think that locates something really valuable in the kind of project we're interested in, but I also think in some of the stuff that Barnet Transformed's aiming to do, basically.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what's really important to remember is we can talk about the slow cancellation of the future, and I think that really gets at how devastating the election defeat felt and feels. I also think it's important to note that there's a slow cancellation of a future. So the future that we imagined, the future that we fought for, the future that we trudged around in the rain for on polling day, that's not going to happen. That's really sad. But look at all this, look at Barnet Transformed, look at what we've got, look at the movement that now exists that didn't 4 or 5 years ago. The idea that none of this mattered, that it's all been washed away by one election defeat, is nonsense to me. And I think we should take incredible sort of joy in that and sort of celebrate it somewhat. I think it's important to accept, and this is some of what Bad New Times is about, important to accept the importance of how just big and catastrophic this defeat was, but also accept it on those terms, not on the terms of, well, that makes everything pointless, because it doesn't, and there's so much to do and we can do it. And yeah, I think that's so important. I just want to note on a housekeeping point of view as well, there are all kinds of exciting links and different resources that are related to what people have been talking about tonight. One of the Barnet Transformed organisers is dropping these into the Zoom chat as we go, so you can check in there at the end or during, check out what people are talking about, how people are organising, get involved. Yeah, I think maybe we can move on to our next speaker now, can't we? What do you think?
Yeah.
So I need to get my finger open again.
Are you introducing?
I don't know, no, it's you. Sorry, we're just trying to sort out who's going in which order, which is a fun time.
Yeah, so moving on then to our next speaker. We've got Farida Stanigzai. Farida has nearly 20 years experience working with the refugee community, and Farida is going to speak about current observations at Barnet Refugee Service, supporting and empowering refugees and asylum seekers to help rebuild their lives and integrate them into society.
Good evening all. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to join this event and have the opportunity to talk about Barnet Refugee Service and the services and the support we provide for refugees and asylum seekers. Sadly, on the global level, the displacement crisis continued to grow within an estimated over 65 million worldwide, of which less than 1% are resettled each year in the UK. Our government's policy regarding people seeking asylum have gone from bad to worse, leaving hundreds of men, women, and children in uncertainty and acute mental health crisis. Being a refugee is when a person is forced to leave their country in order to escape war and persecution. This is when the suffering starts. The lack of control over your life choices, being forced to flee your home and family is not easy. This is when the Barnet Refugee Service come to the fore to support the broken hearts and souls of these individuals. Barnet Refugee Service is much more than a place of hope and care for refugees. Through our unique holistic model of support For the last 12 months, we managed to provide support to 1,800 refugees and asylum seekers, including unaccompanied children. When I'm saying 1,800, at least each individual came to BRS more than 2-3 times. And if you multiply 1,800, please plus multiply by 3, it will be more than 5,000. The services we provide include advice and information, advocacy, volunteering and employment, ESOL provision for people who cannot speak English, mentoring, befriending and peer support, one-to-one and group therapy, youth club, women's group, moms and toddlers group, youth and adult psychosocial activities, sports, including football, basketball, gardening and ecotherapy, homework club, and health access and health promotion workshops. Charities like ours are the voice of the voiceless. Their beacon of their beacon of hope and their shoulder to lean on. Every day, without exception, Barnet Refugee Services staff and volunteers are witnessing the effect and consequences of government harsh and inhuman legislation regarding refugees and asylum seekers. Just to give you an example, that during the pandemic, the government has provided guidance and to combat the spread of coronavirus, social distancing and self-isolation. However, how can an asylum seeker self-isolate who live in an overcrowded shared room which is given by the Home Office? We all know that, people who wants to travel by public transport, they should wear masks, they should have gloves, they should use sanitizers. But how come an asylum seeker who's receiving only £7 a day to go and buy £2 or £2.50 sanitizer, or to buy, that how mask is expensive? And apart from that, we do have clients that they are not getting any financial support from the government, apart from £35 supermarket voucher. Do you think that they can go to the Sainsbury or Morrison or Tesco to buy any cheap mask? I'm sure that you heard lots of stories of asylum seekers. For example, one asylum seeker from Yemen made difficult journey through a channel crossing, came to the UK, but he found death in Manchester. And that's because of the fear that the government wanted to send these people who came from the third country, from the safe country, back home. That's why he passed away last week. At Barnet Refugee Service, the support that we provide, imagine how much additional pressure would be on the government if the organization like us has not existed. For example, we do kind of supporting people, providing counseling. We do provide lots of activities for children. And how possible, that we take lots of burden from the government, and to support, to help NHS, to help councils, to help police. All these things are done by charities like us. And we're so lucky that we have got around 117 committed volunteers that I see some of the faces now on the screen, that they are committed and they provide services for our clients. I will end my speech by reading a passage which is written by one of our ESOL students, a woman who joined our ESOL classes 2 years ago. The time that she came to us, she couldn't speak a word of English. She sent me this passage which says, "I imagine a perfect world to be full of peace, without war and killing. I wish of a world when men and women, black and white, have exactly equal rights and opportunities. I dream of a world to be where all children can live and grow without fear and enjoy their lives. I hope the world change to where all people respect each other, no matter from any religion or any color of skin. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Farida. I think the question of what's being kind of the violence that's being perpetrated on refugees and asylum seekers by our government, and that has always been perpetrated on refugees and asylum seekers by our government, is so crucial. I mean, I'm sure we've all read the horrific story today about Mercy Baguma, who died of malnutrition next to her baby boy. You know, this is shocking. This shouldn't be happening. This shouldn't be happening in our names. It shouldn't be happening at all. And, you know, what I can't think of a more kind of perfect, in a way, if I can't even really use that word, you know, a more accurate description of the ways in which the immigration system in this country is structurally violent and needs to be dismantled. It can't be reformed. It's not broken. It's doing exactly what it's meant to do. But what it's meant to do is murderous and disgusting, and it needs to be dismantled. And I think that's another really crucial thing where we can all contribute. Moving on to another slightly forgotten constituency. Very few people on the left, I find, talk about disability, which is frustrating because disabled people are often, along with refugees, asylum seekers and other marginalised people, at the sharp end of what our governments do. So it's really, really valuable to have somebody speaking tonight who will talk about their own actual lived experience of disability. Michelle Burke lives in Barnet and is going to be talking about the experience of being disabled in Barnet. And she's also going to talk about what disabled people need and demand from society as a whole. It's important to note, actually, that Michelle works for a charity, but tonight Michelle's going to be speaking in a personal capacity, and I'll hand over now.
Hi everyone, so my name's Michelle and I live in Barnet, I live in Hendon, and I also work across the borough. I work for the local DDPO, Deaf Disabled Persons Organisation Inclusion Barnet. Everyone who works at Inclusion Barnet has some form of disability. So my disability is I'm an epileptic and I have clinical depression, something I'm quite open and honest about. I can tell you so many different stories, quite funny ones at times, about what it's like to have a lived experience. So I'm going to talk about a few people who I've had contact with over the years and their lived experience as well. So I work on the Touchpoint service, and at the moment we are dealing with the COVID response. And part of lived experience is being able to know where somebody is coming from. So the other day I took a phone call from a lady. She sent me a text. She said, "Michelle, I really need to talk to you." So she's one of the people who I provide a volunteer for. So I took the phone call. I said, "Hi, how are you?" She said, I'm really struggling to go out the front door. I'm so scared about getting COVID. My mental health is so bad at the moment. I know how that feels. And because I knew how it felt, I could sit down and say to her, everything's going to be all right. You will get yourself past this. But you need to do it in small steps. You need to be kind to yourself. You need to be, when you're having a bad day, take 1 hour at a time. And those are the two best things that I can ever say to anybody. As soon as I say to somebody, yeah, I have clinical depression, I know what it's like when I can't get up out of bed in the morning. You know what? I dread this time of year because I know September and October and the darker nights are coming. I know that my seasonal affective disorder is going to kick in. I know that I'm going to be really struggling to get out of bed in the mornings. And for my epilepsy, I know what it feels like to be saying to a DWP officer, well, when I have a seizure, I can't speak for up to 3 hours. When I have a seizure, I often stop the office dead. I'm going into a seizure, everybody turns around and then goes into panic mode. I know how it feels when somebody is saying to me, Michelle, I can't do this today. It's too hard. How many times have I rang up my line manager and said, I just can't do it today. I can't think about getting myself up out the front door and putting one foot in front of the other. I'm too anxious. I'm too worried. I'm too scared. And that's what having lived experience does. It makes you realize that there's a different world out there for people. One of the things that I'm dealing with a lot in my job and in my personal life, I see people who are going to the doctors, and myself, I rang at the doctor's surgery the other day and I said, I'd really like a doctor's appointment. I'm terrified I've got high blood pressure. And my mother had it, my grandmother had it, on both sides of my family, it's there. And she said, oh, buy a little machine off Amazon and monitor it for over a week or so. Okay, so I did that. Is that going to be the way forward? That we have to monitor ourselves and then ring up and get a doctor's appointment over the phone? And that seems to be the way forward. And that concerns me, because I know people with disabilities won't be able, there are people who think that's marvellous. They don't have to sit at the front door. They can do it in their own space, and they can explain, and they don't have to think about worrying about going up to the doctors. For somebody with a learning disability, that would be really, really hard. A person with learning disability often needs to take their support staff with them. The support staff has to explain and break down all the complicated words that a doctor uses. To do all that over the phone it's not going to be a good look for people. And so that's what we need to think about. We need to also think about housing. Housing for people with disabilities in the borough is completely shocking. I know somebody who was on the West Hendon estate, and she was offered a place that was clearly not suitable for her housing needs and for her disability. They turned her down. They cut her loose. They said, sorry, we've discharging duty of care to you. You've turned us down. You don't want this property. So what do? You know, do you sit back and you take that, or do you fight back? And that's what we do every day of our lives as disabled people. We fight back. We say to people, you know what? You can do this. You need us. We're there. We're going to hold your hand. We're going to talk you through this. We're going to tell you who to go to. And that's what I do in my everyday life. That's my experience as a disabled person. And that is my experience as in my work life, my private life. And it's my superpower. That is my superpower. And my life's been brilliant because of it. And that may seem like a very strange thing to say, but I can honestly say it's been a good life. You know, I've had my issues, but it's been a good life. And that's all I've got to say.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Michelle. And I think, like, if we're thinking again, like, what kind of kind of the various like transformed events can do, and Barnet Transformed is obviously like a case of this. I think, like, as Josie was saying, introducing it as well, like, I think there've been some failings on the left, I think, in addressing questions around disability, whereas obviously like kind of local events like this can actually create kind of spaces, opportunities and forms where like both these experiences can be discussed and shared, but also we can think about like where do like these experiences, kinds of oppression and kind of social contradictions, where do they meet, and what kind of possibilities of solidarity are there? For example, like, you know, something that's come out a lot today is that like essentially housing's generally horrific. Like that's going to be experienced and suffered in different ways by different people who are particularly marginalized. For example, refugees or disabled people, that's likely to be experienced more intensely. And like, what are the capacities if we have an event like this to kind of build solidarity? So moving on, we now have Billy and Bella, who are workers in a Barnet care home and members of the militant grassroots union United Voices of the World. And I think they're going to be discussing their experiences of organising in their care home and radical solidarity.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for inviting me to Barnet Transformed. I'm very excited. Today I want to say that I'm very proud to work for Sage Nursing Home. I'm a carer. In our place, we have a great team. We have formed really close bonds with the residents and their families, and even the independent regulator that monitors nursing homes found that our nursing home is performing well. This is thanks to the great team of carers and key workers that we work there. Basically, we are doing this job with love. This job is a vocation. Like carers up and down the country, we do this work with professionalism, compassion, loyalty, and dedication. I feel really proud with the people that work there. They are doing an amazing job. There is an emotional and physical toll to being a carer. For example, looking after dying residents, you care for day in, day out, moving people around and working night shifts. Even many of my colleagues, the ones that they've been doing this for several years, have back and knee problems. Especially during this time with COVID, we have been risking our lives and our family lives to protect others, people, loved ones. But in this moment, we think that our wages are not decent. We earn poverty pay. It's not enough to pay bills, the rent, or buy food. We are underpaid. We are putting our lives in risk. And I think this is time to recognize what we are doing. Usually, I imagine that you saw on the street, usually on Thursday, they clap for us. And thanks for the claps, but I think are not enough. We need to pay bills. We are doing a job that is amazing job because we are putting our love on there. And then this time with COVID, the positive things is I think was the moment to raise our voice, to say what we are doing. We deserve, if I am a hero, if you said that I'm a hero, that means that you're gonna treat me that's like a hero. But the what we want is about respect and dignity. That's why we organize with our union, and now we feel the support. Our union is supporting us, especially in this COVID time. We feel really proud. I feel really happy to join with the union, because if I'm doing things on my own, maybe my voice is not listening. Nobody wants to know what I'm said. But now we are a collective voice. Even sometimes it's difficult because usually people feel fear because you join with the union, and then some people feel that you are doing something wrong. But if you can feel the power when you are together. And nowadays, we feel the power. We are together. I want to tell people, don't feel scared because you join with the union, because it's your right. You have the right to join with any union. And this is time to raise our voice. And Unite Voices of the World is the union that they are supporting us. They always giving us advice, and then we feel the power. But I want to say, people, we can do it together. Don't feel fear. Go forward. And this is time we need transformation. If I love Barnet, I live in Barnet, I work for Barnet, and then I want to say that I want to know what Barnet is doing for us, how you see the carers, especially the key workers, especially the carers that work in this time. I think it was a very, very hard time. Even I'm gonna show you something. When the pandemic started, they don't provide for us the face shield, but I made this myself. I just use the laminating machine, and then I put an elastic. The first one I used with my leggings, and I put it because I was thinking, how can I protect myself and others? When I made this is how to start the pandemic. Later I improved and I put something better. That is what I said. We love our workplace, we love Barnet, we love our residents, we love the carers, and then we have to look after each other. And then now we can continue to speak with Billy because we are trying to do working as a team, and that's why we are very happy to stay today with this event. And then Billy, you can continue.
Okay, I'm Billy. I work for Sage Nursing Home in Golders Green. I've been working at Sage for over 12 years now. I'm a senior carer. I'm quite happy today to be talking in Barnet Transform, as I will underline some concern and problem we experiencing at Sage. The quality care deserve quality pay. I'm a proud worker, I'm a proud carer, and as far as I'm concerned, I think being a carer deserves better and deserve better payment. We live in poverty when we are doing a very important job for the community. We are helping people to live longer. We are helping people to have a better life, and sometimes even talking to a resident for 2-5 minutes make a big difference in their day. I will also asking everyone, all the carers up and down the country, to come together. As today I might be talking about Sage, but I'm talking about everybody, all the carers. I am a member of the UVW, and the UVW has changed my life, has changed my work, because they bring me a big support. By support, I'm saying that today I work with no fear, I work with confidence, and I work with dignity. And dignity, equality, and respect are value, and they are things you can buy. So as a carer, people have been clapping for us every Thursday, but when I go back to work, I got nothing. When I finish work, when you go home, it's a struggle to meet ends meet. So what we are asking here all together is at least something very simple. 12 pounds per hour is not something big. If I'm sick, I have to come to work. Going to work, I put resident people life in danger, my colleague life in danger, even my boss life in danger. Because being sick and coming to work, why? Because I will get SSP payment, which is, I say, 95, 65 or something like this. We deserve better. When I'm sick, I would like to stay in my house and get paid for it. When you look at the domestic, the laundry people, the maintenance people at work, they don't get better. A laundry staff at work will get 8.72. A domestic, 8.72. A carer, 9.10. A senior carer, 9.60. We deserve better. And what we're asking is a minimum. In London, a worker will get around 15 pounds per hour. Maybe because they're wearing white shirt and a tie. I don't wear a tie to work. I work with my hand and my skills. And I think I deserve better. I deserve respect. So today is a message, and then is a big platform for me. That's maybe one of the first interviews I'm doing, but I'm very proud of it because I got no fear. I know that if my union is recognized, it will be better. If my union is recognized, it will be an improvement for us to move forward. The first voluntary recognition has been declined with no reason. The second option now is a CAC. So we're still waiting for it, but I believe that we will go through. If we don't go through, we find another option. But my union needs to be organized, and we want dialogue, we want positivity, we want a way to move forward, because together we are stronger. The bosses, the management, the carer, the nurses, the staff, all together we are the same, because at the end of the day we are human beings. I work in Golders Green, I work in Barnet for years. So I will call up to all the people in the community. They are human beings like us. I might be a carer, but I'm a human being. If we sit together, if the community come to us to help us to get in touch with Mr. Adrian Jacob, the member of the board, all the big donors of SAGE need to think about us and help us. So that's what I'm looking for, and I'm looking for positivity. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you for that. Sorry everyone about that bad line. Fully automated luxury communism is a bust, it turns out. But that was so important to hear from Billy and Bella, and I think the crucial points came through, yeah? People deserve a better life, people deserve a good life, people deserve fair pay for the work that they do. And if you're going to go outside and stand on your doorstep and clap people and claim that they're heroes, treat them like heroes, let them pay their rent, let them live. It's a fairly simple argument to me, an absolute solidarity with the Barnet care home workers and everyone basically struggling against this complete devaluation of their important labour. I'm going to introduce a slightly different thing now, and I think this is really interesting in terms of how do we think about political expression. We might think about union organising, we might think about disability activism, we might think about a kind of rally like this with all kinds of speeches, but what about poetry? This is a really interesting question. And I'm really, really excited to introduce a reading of a poem by Osei Yaojianing. Osei can't be with us tonight, unfortunately, so one of the Barnet Transformed organisers, Navid, is going to be reading in his absence. But this is a poem written by Osei and included in a collection called We Exist, which is written by members of Out Proud African LGBTI, which is an organisation representing lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and intersex people from a whole range of nations and ethnicities belonging to the African subcontinent. And their mission is the African continent, I'm so sorry. Their mission is to create an environment in which the freedom, rights and equality of LGBTI people are guaranteed, and there is no discrimination based on sexuality and gender identity, which I think is something we can all get behind. And I'm really, really excited to hear this poem, so let's hand over.
Come with me, stick in the ocean, no turning back, journey of no return. I am who I am. Change is not overnight. My last prayer.
Great, thank you for that. And I think, yeah, as Josie said, I think this is really valuable. And actually, I think even come back to what we were saying about NS, I think there's a loss, obviously, around December the 12th, but there's also a broadening of things, less kind of entanglement with kind of politics directly, of the kind of narrowly conceived politics, and which, okay, are you ready to do the next one? Which allows us almost in that disentanglement to have a broader horizon, what if poetry is explicitly kind of part of politics as well? And I think this is at least a valuable opening there is. So there was going to be a brief World Transformed video, but I think because of time, we're skipping that. But obviously the World Transformed, if people don't know, has done really valuable work over the last few years, not least in providing a space where Josie and I could meet each other. But beyond that, really valuable work in political education, and it's definitely worth kind of checking out the work they do. They're doing instead of in a physical place, they're doing a month-long online festival, so it's definitely worth looking into that. But yeah, moving on, Jason.
So this is the last you're going to hear from us. Gutting, I know. I'm going to introduce Maimouna Osman. Many of you will already know Maimouna. She's an experienced campaigner and activist, and she's going to share her experiences of organising around housing in Barnet, as well as advocating for migrant rights, two things that have come up a lot over the course of this evening. She's going to talk to us about building the power necessary to fight and win. She's going to make some exciting announcements about upcoming events, and she may also be introducing somebody who doesn't live in Barnet but does live rent-free in the heads of every journalist I can name. So without further ado, I'll hand over.
Thanks, Josie. Firstly, I just want to say a massive thank you to all the brilliant comrades who have come together to launch Barnet Transformed. I had the pleasure of spending a lot of time with many of you over the past year, and yeah, it's really great to be here. In the current political context, it's so easy to despair. So events like these, which highlight the amazing campaigns which are taking place locally, are vital and important reminders of what we can do collectively. And I've just found it so heartening to hear from all of you, including UVW and many other great initiatives that we've heard about tonight. I only have a few minutes before I hand over to our main speaker. So I'm just going to briefly touch on some of the migrant rights campaigns which I'm working on at the moment with Migrants Organise, but also drawing from examples of community organising that, like I said, we did in Barnet over the past year with the Labour Party's community organising unit. Yeah, so those are all what we're going to be talking about mainly is examples of how community organising can build power in communities. Community organising isn't a new concept at all, even though it's come up as a buzzword over the past couple of years. It is simply the process of building grassroots power. It involves communities defining their own priorities, designing their own campaigns, and leading these. It also involves people gathering together around a shared set of collective principles and progressive politics, and pushing for longer term structural change. So there are many instances of migrants organising in the past in the UK for better housing, pay, and work conditions. A well-known case is the migrant workers of Grunwick, who organised pickets, but also maybe less well-known mass community actions involving various different people from the community and to win better pay and working conditions in the 70s. So elsewhere in the 90s, Migrants Organised was formed by 14 different individuals from migrant communities, and they came together to, it was called the Forum back then, and they set this forum up to organise for migrant rights and also set up some self-help initiatives. So this has been happening for many, many, many years, often led by migrants, and it still continues today. Migrants Organised members are speaking out against the cruel hostile environment policies which inflict real hardship on many, many people's lives. This includes campaigns against NHS charging, but also housing campaigns and campaigns against data sharing. Many of you who would have been involved in some of those. In Barnet specifically, residents also overcame great adversity to organise themselves for secure housing and decent living conditions. They came together around a set of demands, and they won. They had the courage to speak out and to hold people in positions of power in Barnet to account. And by doing this, they inspired other people on neighbouring estates to also do the same. They set up residents' associations, they spoke out on national media, and they're still fighting today. Labour Party members and other local residents, some of whom are here today, showed up for residents with real practical support and solidarity. And the reason I shared the stories of these campaigns, because they're a reminder to myself, but hopefully to all of us, who desperately want to imagine a better and brighter future. The community organising campaigns are just one way we can move towards this future, but it will also take a combination of many and many other things, some of which the speakers have mentioned today: workplace organising, self-help initiatives, political education, and meaningful electoral organising and campaigning. So if you're wondering where to start, follow Barnet Transformed for exciting sessions they have lined up. I know that there will be a session on community organising in September, and I'll also be joining Barnet Transformed for another session on how to get involved with migrant rights campaigning. Also elsewhere in Barnet, there are really excellent councillor training programmes being run by Hendon CLP and others, which I think hopefully can be shared after the call. So anyway, now I'm going to hand over to a speaker who has dedicated many years to campaigning for dignity and for justice for all. He really needs no introduction. So over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, and thank you for inviting me to Barnet Transformed this evening, and thank you all for being on the call and for the work you do in Barnet Transformed. Barnet is a large borough which at one level has an image of being a particularly wealthy place, but at another it is a very diverse borough with poverty, with real social pressures and social difficulties there. And I know the borough fairly well because I'm the MP in the neighbouring borough of Islington to the south, or neighbouring but one with Haringey in between. But also in the 1970s and early 1980s, I was a union organiser in Barnet, organising people working in Barnet General Hospital and for Barnet Council, and campaigning against the privatisation of services at that time. Care services and the refuse collection services, for example. And I was always proud to work with Barnet Trades Council and with the Labour Party and unions throughout Barnet in doing that. Because in a sense, what we're talking about tonight is the empowerment of people. And that's what Barnet Transformed is about. That has to be our theme, the empowerment of people. We're all given a strong and subliminal message that individually we are very weak. When we come together in a union, in a community, in an organisation, it immediately strengthens us. So we're fed a daily diet that all that matters in the world is personal success, individual wealth and celebrity, and you achieve that at the expense of everybody else. How often is the housing crisis discussed in terms of the property ladder rather than the needs of people all to be safely and adequately and securely housed? It's the use of language that is important. And so the one advantage, if it is an advantage, compared to the horrors of what's happened with COVID, has been that people have been able to come together through this medium, through Zoom calls and others like that, and talk to each other in a way they often never have before. So I really compliment you tonight on the range of speakers you've got, the issues you've covered, refugees, disability, union organisation in care homes, and fantastic that you had some poetry on as well, because there is a creative in all of us, and poetry is a very important part of that creative. Now, I was devastated by the election result in December, as I'm sure many people were. And there have been many, many analyses of what happened and why we didn't win that election campaign, and many more will no doubt be written about it. What I'd simply say is this, and I'll come back to it towards the end of my contribution, is that everything I tried to do was about empowering people, was about democratizing our society, was and is about investing in the future, and saying to people, you don't have to be left behind. You don't have to accept second best. We need the best quality of public services, and we need the best quality of education and the empowerment of people to achieve those things. And that is what has come out of that last 5 years. There's been a dedication of many towards organising within their communities and empowering people. Think of those in the 18th and 19th century that organised unions, organised communities together in order to achieve education, achieve social security, achieve publicly owned council housing. All those things all came because of people being prepared to organise within their communities. And that has to be the way forward in the future. And we're not alone in this. The whole ideas of communities being strengthened is happening all across the world. It's happening in the United States, it's happening in Europe, it's happening all over the world, where people are seeing the inequalities and the fractured societies for what they are because of the corona crisis. Now, corona came about because the World Health Organization informed the world about it in January. It was an epidemic, then it rapidly became a pandemic. And what it exposed was the lack of health care around the world and the inadequacy of health provision and care provision in what are actually some of the wealthiest societies in this world. So it's the poorest people in the poorest places, in the poorest parts of sometimes the wealthiest societies, who've suffered the most as a result of it. And because of the inequalities within our society, the gap between the richest and the poorest has grown during COVID. It hasn't shrunk at all. And so we've got to address that. When the corona crisis was announced, the bed occupancy rate in National Health Service hospitals was at 94%. The occupancy rate overall in the care sector was well over that figure as well. And there were times when many local authorities around the country who were asked to coordinate response to corona crisis found it very hard to cope. So what happened? People in care work, people in the NHS, people in the delivery sector worked to superhuman levels in order to try and get through. Tens of thousands of people volunteered to help in food banks and food distribution from those food banks and food hubs. I've been to all of the food banks and food hubs in my own community, and fantastic support to the community from many people. I think that is an example to us for the future of what communities can do together. I just ask you this question. When we're faced with a public health crisis like corona crisis, who's more help in society? Speculators, hedge fund managers, or cleaners and delivery workers, health workers, doctors, nurses? We all know the answer to that question. So it's been a reality check for many people. The other reality check has been about the use of public funds and what the public services, what the state exists for. During the election campaign, I was roundly condemned by many of the media for the amount of money I was proposing that we should be spending on investment in health, investment in housing, investment in education, investment in a green industrial revolution. Yes, there would have been expenditure. But that expenditure would have been raised by taxing those that can afford to pay a bit more in tax, by bringing essential services like mail, rail, and water into public ownership, and that would have provided a better living standard for the community as a whole. This government actually was forced to spend a great deal of money in order to try and protect jobs in the private sector as well as the public sector during the height of that crisis. They've spent money that they claimed could not be spent and accused me of trying to spend during the election campaign. But now comes the reckoning. Our economy is clearly fragile. Very many jobs in both the public and the private sector are at risk when the furlough scheme comes to an end in October. This autumn, there's going to be the most massive debate, campaign, and disputes about protecting jobs and employment and about the kind of society we're going to become. Are we going to repeat what happened in the 1980s when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, then one of Barnet's MPs, when the whole idea was to sell off the public sector, to turn everything into a business and create greater levels of inequality? Are we going to repeat the mistakes after the banking crisis of 2008, when we brought the banks into a form of public ownership in order to return them to the private sector, but at the same time bailed out others in the banking and financial sector at the expense of the living standards of the rest of the community, at the expense of frozen wages, of falling living standards, of a deepening housing crisis and so on? Or are we're going to say, well, actually, this is a time for reckoning. We need an economic restructuring. We want investment in the future, investment in a green industrial revolution, investment in our public services. And I absolutely support the campaign that's just been announced and mounted by Unison, pointing out the underfunding of local government. Local government is key to our lives, to our communities, and it needs to be properly funded in order to achieve that. Many in local government are forced to work for the private sector as contractors to their local authorities. We need to end that. Those services should be done in-house more efficiently. The care sector ought to be a publicly run care sector rather than an overwhelmingly private sector organisation, which it is at the present time. Our National Health Service suffers from the same problem. Health and Social Care Act actually requires the contracting out of large amounts of our services. Billions are paid every year to private healthcare companies. And coming down the track are the future trade negotiations with Europe and with the United States. I revealed during the election campaign exactly what the terms of those trade deal talks were with the USA. And it was pretty clear that the agenda is, set by this government, is to put health and social care on the market for American healthcare companies and corporations to come in and run our services in the way that they would want to do so, and to systematically deregulate the labour market, which is already quite deregulated anyway in this country, to make it much worse. I was accused of leaking Russian propaganda. I was accused of all kinds of things. Most of our media, to their eternal shame, didn't discuss the issue that I was talking about, but discussed the source of the documents that I revealed during the prime ministerial debate during the election campaign. And so we've got big, big campaigns ahead of us, and that means we've got to be organised in order to deal with it. The big issues are social injustice and social poverty, but also environment and the future of our own planet. We've seen global warming, we've seen global pollution, we've seen the diminishing of the biodiversity of our society. But we've also seen a growing understanding that we can and should all do something about it, as well as campaign on the big issues. And so what I admire about what you're doing in Barnet Transformed is you're empowering people to improve their own lives. You have major roads running through the borough, the A1 and so on, and the levels of air pollution that come from those are huge. And so people living alongside those major roads, children growing up and going to primary schools alongside major roads, suffer worse air quality than others. That's not right, it's not necessary, and it has to change. But it's also about how we campaign towards COP26 coming up next year. COP26 has got to build on 2015. 2015 talked about net zero by 2050. The current rate of progress, that will not be achieved in this country and won't be achieved in most countries around the world. It is up to us to campaign very, very hard to try and achieve net zero much, much sooner, which is why I put the aim in our manifesto that we would achieve net zero by 2030 in the election campaign. And it's up to us now to campaign to try and deliver that. Many of the speakers you've had this evening have talked about many issues around the world that impact on our own lives as well. Fundamentally, international relations should be about peace, about justice, about democracy, and about humanity. There are over 65 million people around the world who are either internally displaced or refugees. There are people in this country who are living in desperate poverty. The woman who died in Glasgow of hunger, apparently. And that surely builds on a system which says some people have no recourse to public funds. Some people spend years and years in limbo waiting for their refugee application to be dealt with. And I pay absolute tribute to those that do the monthly support at Martin School in Barnet, run by the local synagogue, but also with the support of the mosque and many others, I understand it, in providing food and support to those people who are denied any access to public funds. That basic humanity is there in all of us. Let's make sure that that humanity now plays out in the political debate about those desperate people crossing the channel and pitching up in Dover. When I see the screaming headlines in some of our papers about asylum seekers and refugees, I just think for a moment, you have to be pretty desperate to get in a dinghy and try and get across the channel in order to get to a place of relative safety. Just as people are making impossible journeys in many parts of the world to try to get to a place of safety, walking across deserts to end up in refugee camps in Libya or in Jordan or in Syria or wherever there is a conflict, people are seeking safety and refuge. So surely a foreign policy, an international strategy that's based on bringing about peace and justice around the world has to be the priority that we should put forward. The Rohingya, 1 million people have sought refuge in Bangladesh, not a wealthy country, from the situation in Myanmar. Shouldn't we be doing a bit more about that? Shouldn't we be doing a bit more about refugees in other situations as well? The deaths in the United States of people shot by the police on the streets has enhanced the message of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter movement is a movement globally, in solidarity with those that are victims of police and other violence, but also they've become a global movement to understand the history, understand where we all come from, understand the brutality of slave trade, of colonialism, understand the cultural domination that is taught in our history, which devalues the lives of people in Latin America, in South Asia, and in Africa. So it's up to us, surely, to promote those debates and promote those discussions, because that is what we are about, as people coming together to try and achieve that better world and that better society by our own empowerment. Many of us are forced to see the world through the prism of a media system that has a completely different set of values. In 2018, I gave a lecture, the MacTaggart Lecture, as part of the Edinburgh Festival, obviously in Edinburgh, in Scotland. And I was talking then about the power of the right of reply in the media and the need for promoting diversity in the media, the multiplicity of ownership and access to media outlets through social media and other means. It's important that we build our own form of information, our own form of getting the message and media across. Because what we're taught about our politics is essentially an endless internal gossip circle, where a group of people who think they're incredibly important talk to each other and each enhance each other's importance and talks more and more about gossip of who said what to who fell out with who disagreed with who, and so on. And it all becomes a sort of power game between individuals in parliament, in local authorities, in big companies, whatever else. Those journalists that write all this stuff should just reflect for maybe just half a moment what it's like to face real pressure when you can't feed your kids, when you're working in the NHS and you don't know where the next bed is coming from for the next emergency patient that's coming in. When you're a care worker, given 15 minutes to care for somebody who needs far more time than that. Those are the real pressures that many ordinary people, actually extraordinary people, face day in and day out, but is not reflected at all in our media's discussion of what politics and priorities and principles are about. So, community organising, transforming people's lives, transforming society, giving children the opportunity to learn music, dance and poetry and be inspired rather than ground down by a programme of testing and isolation and diminishing their own self-esteem. I hope that Barnet Transformed can grow. It's obviously already very big, and this process is happening all over the country. I'll tell you what, at the end of the corona crisis, at the end of all this, we're going to emerge as much stronger people, because political power is not just about holding office and winning elections, very important as that is. It's also about the presence of communities coming together to empower each other. That is how our unions are built. That is how so much of our society happens. Behind every library, behind every public park, behind nearly all of our public facilities, lies a campaign of people coming together to try and achieve something better within our society and our world. Barnet Transformed, well done, and it's been an absolute pleasure and an honour to be invited to share a few thoughts with you this evening. Thank you very much.
Nothing but respect for my Prime Minister. What can I say? And do you know what? He's right. It is up to us. It's up to us. So this is as good a place to start as any. Let's do it. If you're not inspired by that, I don't know what to tell you. If you're looking for a place to start, then more Barnet Transformed events might be just the ticket. I'm going to hand over now to Naveed from Barnet Transformed, who's going to tell you about some of them.
Thank you, Josie, and obviously thank you to all of our speakers as well. I'm not going to keep you long, but thank you for joining. I think it's kind of gone beyond all of our expectations, so we're really excited to see where we can take this. In terms of where we do take this, I've put on the screen a little graphic on what we're thinking for the next event, which is on 16th September. And essentially it's looking to see where do we take this, what do we need to transform within Barnet, and obviously reflecting on some of the words that we've heard this evening. Do follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Don't really understand Instagram, but I'm sure there's exciting things happening there. You can sign up on our mailing list at barnettransform.com, and soon after this event, the recordings and some of the links that have been in the chat will be available. We're going to close the call now, but we will leave it on for a minute or so you can collect those links. And yeah, thanks again, everybody, for joining.